The Mystery of Belicena Villca by Nimrod de Rosario. First Book, The Disappearance of Taffy de Valle. Chapter 1. I met Belicena Villca when she was interned in the Neuropsychiatric Hospital Dr. Javier Patrón Isla in the city of Salta, under diagnosis of irreversible senile dementia. Being medic of the pavilion of incurable patients, I had to pay attention to the referred patient for a long year, in which I applied all the resources that the psychiatric science and my extensive experience in the profession gave to attempt, vainly, her recuperation. As will be seen later, her story was written by herself while she remained in that joyless confinement. She dedicated to that purpose all the available times, which was a lot because the medical joint had authorized her to write, due to the activity redounded and evident therapeutic results on the mood of the patient. Although no one knew to what referred her rights, and if they revealed some logical coherence, information which possession would have been helpful to confirm or correct to adverse diagnosis. 2 reasons avoided to know the content of her writings. The first, and main reason, consisted that the patient wrote in Checwa, Santanguino, a language which is only spoken in her natal region. In secrecy, it seems Belicena Villca translated the writings into Spanish a few days before she died. The second reason was the homicidal zeal that she put to avoid the reading of the texts, which ended one day in a violent incident with a nurse who dared to look at one of its pages. But as what concerned her was to maintain her calm, and the writing contributed to maintain her in that state. They opted to not contradict her maniac desires, and they allowed her to hide the writings in a briefcase from which she was never separated. However, part of her story was related to me by herself during her convalescence, either through large monologues that were frequently on her psychoanalytic sessions, in the days in which some mental stability allowed this therapy, or involuntarily, when the narcosis treatment plunged her into a heavy stupor, where, however, never decreased her oral activity. Naturally, it was not possible to give credit to her statements, not only due to her diseased condition, but for the tenor of them, which were incredible and hallucinative. Her writings would never be qualified with more justice as an own story of a mad woman. The alienated situation of Belicena Villca surely will discourage the readers about the veracity of the narrated events. It is comprehensible because just 1 year ago, I'd have made all possible to avoid the divulgation of the material that prudence and the professional ethic counsel to maintain in the reserved ambits of the clinical history and the personal expedient. But while this was happening, the sudden death of Belicena Villca came to derange this rational perspective, and took me to think that history registers the pass of venerable figures by the cells of famous madhouses. I remember Nietzsche, Ezra Pound, Antonin Artaud, the chess player Morphy, the mathematician Cantor, and many others. I reasoned that those famous personages suffered from an acute schizophrenia as my patient, which means that the consciousness remains fragmented but not dissolved, and it is possible eventually that some temporal lucidity states can occur where the behavior is more or less normal. I said to myself that if Cantor elaborated the brilliant theory of the transinfinite numbers in the material hospital, and if Nietzsche, during his 10 years of internee, could quote Homer, Empedocles, and almost any classic by rote in the ancient Greek, was possible, in an infinite fewer way, that the narration of Belicena Villca was real in part. Of course, this apparently inconsistent syllogism will surprise the reader, but all this I thought very quickly because Belicena Villca was murdered. Chapter 2. The unpleasant incident perturbed the impeccable march of the hospital, submerging us in an indescribable state of discomfort and anguish. Specially affected was our director, the eminent Dr. Cortez, who feared that the scandal could reach to smirch the name of the illustrious location excellence that the hospital had. Fact that, according to his clear logic, would influence in the checks that the powerful family of the deceased gave monthly. I will not fatigue the reader with the details because this case was very commented by the news, and if it is desired can consult the newspaper, El Heraldo, from Salta, in the editions of the week from the 7th to the 15th day of January in 1980, where you will find all the information. I will only remember here the essential, due to the development of the veridical case, requires to consider the strange circumstances in which the crime occurred, and the mystery that surrounded it. And that still persists because the police didn't achieve to clarify it, and dignified functionaries manifest doubts about if that will be possible one day. Because two elements so absurd as irrational intervene in a definitive way in the fatal denouncement, impeding any possibility to realize coherent conjectures. The first is a verified, unobjectionable fact. The crime was committed in a cell for psychotic patients hermetically closed by a heavy steel door between 0000 hours and 0200 hours of January 6th, without anyone, absolutely anyone, who would have entered during that lapse. This was proved happily due to the fortuitous incident. In the last night before, January 5th, i.e., day of celebration of the Three Wise Men, part of the staff went to distribute gifts to the Children's Hospital and the orphanage San Francisco de Asís. Within them was our distinguished Dr. Cortez, who at 23 hours was already back, still wearing the Santa Claus costume and disposed to effectuate the daily journey that, since countless years, he realized through all the pavilions to pick up the final reports. Hence the own Dr. Cortez saw for the last time Belicena Villca alive at 23:50 hours. When due to a hysterical crisis on its second phase, she promoted a general disorder in the B pavilion, running desperately in the reduced pace of the cell, with fixed and exorbitant eyes, while she was screaming, "Pachachut quiyi, pachatut quiyi," words which in that moment were incomprehensible for me, even if we recognized that it was about the Quechua language, otherwise the attack was symptomatically abnormal to her. Dr. Cortez ordered an immediate dose of Valium, submerging the unfortunate Belicena Villca in a stupor from which she could only get out for a moment to see the death close her. Just as suggested the tremendously horrifying expression which was twitched on her countenance when she was found, already dead, 3 hours later. Appears the mystery, the first element that disconcerted and surprised the experimented cups. After that the patient was attended at 0000 hours. All of us moved aside from the cell, being this closed by Dr. Cortez, who inadvertently saved the key in one of his customs of Santa Claus, forgetting later to deposit it on the general keychain. At 3 a.m, when the nurse in turn makes the habitual round, she noticed the missing of the key, what no one knew how to explain. She deduced from this that the key was taken by Dr. Cortez, and, as the duplicates are in his office, she had no other alternative than to call him to his house. It was not necessary because the operator of the internal commutator informed that the doctor was still in the hospital, although he was just about to leave. Warning him of this mistake, he decided to go up to the B pavilion to give the key and realize a brief ocular inspection. It means that during those 3 hours, the key, unique medium to open the blinded door of the cell, was in power of Dr. Cortez. But the director of the hospital was a man of a recognized social trajectory, whose moral virtues had always been exalted as an example worthy of emulation, and from whom, at last, no one would dare to doubt, neither the experimented policeman, Mayadana, in charge of the investigation. Finally, Dr. Cortez opened the door of the cell, accompanied by me and the nurse Garcia, exactly at 0300 hours. A penetrating and sweet smell was the first that caught our attention. Was a fragrance like sandal incense, which was out of place, that we looked at each other perplexed. But just for a moment, because what came next concentrated all of our attention. Belicena Villca lying on her bed, undoubtedly dead since some time ago, with her neck swollen due to the strangulation that she was submitted. The homicidal arm, a rope ivory-colored, was still enlaced on her head but already released, and the two extremities falling gently over her chest were up to the corners of the bed, was such a horrible spectacle that the experimented nurse Garcia exclaimed a terror, screaming as she staggered back, needing to be held by her shoulders. Although my legs were not strong at all, and it was not for less, the dead had her hands closed over the blankets on both sides of the body, position where they had to be at the moment of death, and that the cadaveric rigidity conserved. What indicated that she didn't defend herself against the mysterious murderer? He infused such terror that, even looking how he passed the rope around her neck and then feeling it closing and cutting her breath, she only desperately clung to the blankets. Such deduction was confirmed by the contemplation of the gesture of her visage, big and exorbitant eyes, a half-closed mouth allowing to see the swollen tongue which seemed to be broken on an unfinished word. Something that will never be pronounced again, perchance the mysterious Pachachut kui. I will expose now the second absurd and irrational element, which, as it intervened with the weight of the concrete, removed any hope to obtain a soon and simple solution. I will explain it better. The incomprehensible fact that the door was locked at the moment of the crime, first element, could be disregarded, establishing the logic hypothesis. even if they were improbable that the killer had another key, or the existence of a conspiracy of the medical staff, etc. After all, such hypothesis was formulated by the police, and what they pretended was to despoil the case from any mystery or supernatural illusion. But the ivory-colored rope, second element, was a too tangible object to be ignored. The second element was the evidence that something sinister and irrational had been irresistibly installed among us. It was about a rope of 1 meter long, made of hair, apparently human, braided and dyed. But the exceptional was represented by 2 gold medals, one on each side, turning madly in the 2 small cones of gold. The medals by themselves constituted the most absurd of the set, exactly equal in their form to a Star of David, but were not, however, their engravings and inscriptions. One of them had chiseled a 4-leaf clover wrought in the central hexagon. The other showed a fruit which undoubtedly corresponded to a pomegranate. I found them similar to the Masonic jewels that I saw in an exposition on the Rotary Club, but the familiarity ended when I remembered and reasoned that the only point of resemblance between these and them was the Star of David that, as everybody knows, is formed by 2 intertwined equilateral triangles. This is a symbol adopted since millenniums ago by the Hebrew people to identify themselves, as can be verified today seeing it in the flag of the State of Israel. The subsequent parts of the medals had inscriptions, but these, farther to clarify something, increased our confusion, because they were written in 2 different languages. One phrase, horizontally engraved in the center, was written in Hebrew characters, even though the signs were not the same on each medal. Surrounding these words was another inscription in Latin letters, this time identical for both jewels. In that moment, no one could clarify to what language they belonged. Ada, ais, side, traoe, mak which. The Hebrew words on their part said, "In the pomegranate and in the clover." As will be understood, this curious bejeweled rope gave all the sensation to be something of a ceremonial or religious use. Attribute to the officer Maidana noticed immediately because at the first moment when he examined, he couldn't avoid an expression of repugnance and exclamation, "Pwah! This is something Jewish!"